Our earliest drawing experiences are usually with pencil, and usually with the possibility, therefore, of erasing any mistakes. And if we like to get things right, we may go through as many erasers as we do pencils. But the time comes when we might be excited at the possibility of drawing in ink. But how do we draw when we can't take anything back once it's on paper? How do we plot things and draw things so that we can commit to some accuracy and be happy with what we draw and be confident with those first lines that they're in the right places? This is a 1.5 hour real-time drawing where I'm going to talk through how I think it out when I commit with every line directly in ink. Let's go. It's wise to spend a few moments getting an overall view of our reference photo so we can start to plot the most helpful way to draw it. Where to start is obviously the first question. I like to start with a simple point that I can use to reference from, and this column here is rather obviously that starting point. So I'll be drawing this column first, and then this little section here, then progress along, and then I'll draw this section on top. Then I'll either go left or right, I haven't really decided yet, and then put the dome on, and by then I'll be a bit warmed up to come down into this rather more challenging section below this line here. I've decided I'm going to not draw this very cluttered sign and garbage bin there because I don't think they particularly help the composition, and I'd rather the focus be on these two lamp posts here. And because they're in front of the building, I need to be careful once I start this lower section that I preserve space for them with the line work which will sit behind. And the same thing when I get down to this very bottom level of the building, I need to make sure I draw the figures in, the heads in, before lines that will pass behind them. The other thing I noticed is that with this perspective angle, I am looking up quite underneath this section here, and that these capitals are rather squared off more so than normal. And so I want to capture the fullness of the depth of this. And of course, these sculptured figures here will be the big challenge. But hey, when I come to draw them, the important thing will be that these bases here, this line here, follows the correct perspective across the four statues, and that their heads also follow the correct perspective line. So, enough procrastinating, time to start drawing. So now it's time to put that planning into operation. So I draw this first column, and then I spend quite a long time really working on getting these two perspective lines above and below this column correct. Even sped up, you can see that it takes me quite a lot of time, and there is a lot of fiddling and back and forth, and I don't commit to it hastily, and I do actually make it a little more extreme, both top and bottom, than what I originally draw. It is hard to draw these perspective lines as great as they often are. And when we don't do that, we lose some of the drama that higher angles give us in our drawing, in our scene. And so I do these pairs of columns moving across. I'm seeing this portico as a single section of the building. And once I've drawn it, it will give me a good foundation to go upwards and down and each side. But I will work on the upper half of the building first, where I'm not worried about what's underneath. So I'm really working at positioning things in the spaces that I've got. I also try and use those things to help me work out how wide the spaces need to be. Adding the cornice on. With cornices, it's important that each line that goes up is at a slightly higher angle, but that it's higher at one end than the other. And that takes a little bit of effort and concentration to do. And now I'm positioning the platform for this sculptural group that sits on top. It's important to align it with underneath what's in the reference photo. So I actually position the head with the things that are underneath it. So I've more or less finished this top section. I decide to go to the right, and the right and left sides, particularly the right side because it's further back, it doesn't need to be in quite as much detail. I want to get the proportions correct, but I'm not fussed with as much of the details. It really is the sense of the building extends over on this side, and wanting to get the windows aligned and the things that we'll notice if they're not right. I find that if I establish the main details correctly, such as these columns, then parts of the building that align with them are very easy and quick to confidently place. It's learning to know which parts to go slowly and carefully, because those sections then will give you maximum faster reference points for other bits. But with everything, it's important to keep those perspective lines. I found this side challenging because the perspective angles arc up, not straight lines, and they arc up more and more as they get higher in the drawing, and that isn't something I'm used to doing normally. So I'm positioning these roof decorations, I'm positioning them according to the reference photo. If we were looking straight on the building, they would be above each column, but from this angle, they're not directly centered on the columns. And then I can position the dome now again using what I've already drawn. Now I fuss around a bit with these columns because I decide they're sloping to the right in a way that I don't like. So I try to make some adjustments just slightly by using shadows to push them towards the left a little down the base. I don't know how successful I was, but it's important not to try and correct too much, because if you end up with too much line work, it actually draws more attention to the part that's not quite right. So I'm now progressing on with the bottom section and positioning these sculptures, trying to leave spaces for the lamps and for other things, putting heads in so that I've got spaces in some of the horizontal lines to insert people. And then positioning the lower half, I actually start on the left hand side with this lower section, and this is a bit more difficult, and this is an easy composition to put lots of people in because none of them are very close. So we're really just being very suggestive, and the important thing is to keep the heads aligned so that the perspective is kept intact. And then I move over onto the lower right hand side. I had a problem here. The proportions aren't particularly good, and there's not really enough space for it to happen. But fortunately, this is the most gestural part of the entire drawing, so I don't need to overwork details there. And I did, again, try to make a few adjustments at the end to lower the heads a little, just to give me a little more space to fit that lower story in. And then it's really going back and forth. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. One of the great things about drawing directly in ink is that we do have to just keep pushing on. We can't get precious about any lines we've drawn. That view of the Hofburg Palace in Vienna is relatively complex, and having a good look at my drawing, having finished and switched off the camera, I can see that initial porch structure that I drew, I made a bit too wide, and I've worked out why I ran out of space for the lower floors. Always good to critique our drawings after we finished and understand why we did what we did and what we are and aren't happy with, because that all gives us a place to start our next drawing from. Just that little bit further ahead from where we started this one that we've just done. I've uploaded this reference photo onto my community page, so if you'd like to have a chance drawing this scene yourself directly in ink, then go for it. And if you think, oh, it's too hard, then just draw a section. Just aim to draw that central section that I started with. And who knows, if it works out and you're feeling confident, you might want to extend out to the left and out to the right and up a little bit. And before you know it, you may actually have drawn the whole thing. But just aim to take it bit by bit. Another great way to make it easier to draw directly in ink when we're not used to it is to give ourselves a timed challenge. So I take a scene and I say to myself, I have to finish it within 5 minutes. Now, just by pushing myself to go quickly, that gives me permission to draw some lines in the wrong places. It gives me permission to go for the feel of the building or the scene, not the exactness of it. And that's often exactly what I need to do, to give myself permission to have a few lines that aren't exactly right. So I can really recommend that. But whichever way you draw in ink, have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.